they don't want people swarming around looking for stuff. You ask first, and probably one of the key relationships I maintain with people is the landowners, because without the cooperation of landowners, I'd be sitting there with a pile of rocks being really bummed out, you know? So that's one thing that's real important, is the landowners, they come first, so. But I want to assure landowners that just because you have something doesn't mean that anybody can tell you anything, you know, in terms of what you can do with your land and all that stuff. That's kind of been a misnomer, so to speak. Of course, just with the caveat is that you dig up somebody's body, you're digging up somebody's body, you know. You can't tell me, I can't tell you how old it is. Could be yesterday. You know, could be Jimmy Hoffa, I don't know. You don't know, you know. So, but I just wanted to hit that kind of note, and I don't really know if I covered everything I wanted to say, but again, the boat building thing you can see in the evidence. It seems to be the one constant throughout the timeline. And it's neat because most of us kind of pride ourselves on being boat people too. So it kind of really is a way we can connect. I mean, really. I mean, you know, because most of our area is kind of focused around the river, and I'm throwing in the Chemot River too. It's a river, not the big river, but it's a river. But really, it's all about that stuff, you know. And we kind of all think of ourselves as pretty boatish people. These guys make it with sticks, stones. A long time ago. When the pharaohs were doing their thing, there's guys making boats with rocks. Anyway, just to wrap myself up, I'll go ahead and take whatever questions you guys, or whatever you want to talk about.
Have you ever found any remains of the boats or anything? Or?
Remains of the boats. I specifically have not, but I'm one of those that collects information from all the old timers. And I do know of a report, an eyewitness report in about 1920s, I want to say, that if you're familiar with French Creek, there's Commodes Creek. It's kind of a little arm that comes off. If you go up to Furno Hill, there's a dead-end road that's called Commodes Road. Well, there's a creek there. Well, I do know a guy, when he was a boy in the 1920s, him and his cousin pulled out of the mud a dugout canoe. And, of course, thinking it was cool, they brought it home, set it out, thrown it in the barn. Well, the next day it was nothing but a pile of dust. Of course, something like that, you would need to know how to preserve it and so on and so forth. They didn't know. I mean, they're just like, hey, look at this, you know, because they're playing in the mud. But, so there has been evidence found, like I say, so there's been evidence of dugout canoes directly, but there's also, just from the tool assemblages, we've got a pretty good idea that they're also doing bark boats, whether it's birch bark or elm bark. I mean, both those kind of things we use. But the tools tell you a lot. Yes.
Do the tools mainly granite?
No, the tools actually are a variety of things. Starting out with some of the oldest stuff, like the diagnostic stuff that the guy was identifying from that Fort Drum boat building site, was actually quartz, shattered quartz pieces. And they actually have kind of a triangular shape, fracture, and those are actually awls used to drill holes. And you can actually see micro wear patterns on them under a magnifying glass. So there was those. A lot of the time through history, there was of course a lot of use of chipstone tools, which would have been made from flint, or in our area it's basically a chert. And most of the stuff that you see that's a gray color, it's called Onondaga chert. Its sourcing is actually more like closer to where its namesake is, downstate. But there's a local chert, a black colored chert called the Ray chert, or Black River chert. And actually, Fort Drum uncovered they're the nearest known quarry for flint or chert in our area, and that's a little spot by Fort Drum. It's really strange. It looks just like our limestone outcroppings, but when you clean it up, they were shattered. It's this black, glassy. And a lot of the black, I don't know if there's that much in here right now, but flint stuff is made from local stuff. And then there's a lot of ground tools, which are made from anything from a slate to a type of sandstone. There's this stuff that I just call it greenstone. It's kind of a sandstone-like material. You see a lot of that because it was easily ground. For instance, this is something that people can come up and touch if they want because it's cool. But see, this is an accent. If you actually hold this to a profile of a modern axe, it's pretty close. And this is a ground object, and it can cut. So I mean, they'll hold an edge.
What's that?
Pass that around if you'd like.
What's the stone right there?
This stone, I don't know its geologic term, but I call it greenstone. It's basically a greenish sandstone.
Where was this found?
That came from what I call it French Creek One, the Bishaw site. It's basically a large area that's a boat building site. All kinds of activity happening there.
Besides that, the Bishaw site is at the back of French Bay, and then at the end of French Creek, you have the site. Do you know of any sites through French Creek?
Yeah. And some of this comes from investigating in the archives of the Rochester Museum. Because if anybody's familiar there, there's a collector called, in the old days, years ago, Jack Carter, who did a lot of collecting around here. And he had some notes, so I dug through all of them. And he mentioned a few things. One of them was near Frontenac Springs, recovering some ceramics, which tells me that if it's not Iroquois, then it was maybe a little pre-Iroquois. There's been and he also had some notes about finding some stuff in he called the sand dunes at the head of French Creek, which I believe I know about where it is, and there's reports of people finding stuff there over the years I've heard. And basically you've got two known Iroquois villages at the head of French Creek. You've got something called the Matson site, which is off of the southernmost leg of French Creek, actually the Portage leg, and then something called the St. Lawrence site, which is on another leg that goes up Mutton Lane there, up near St. Lawrence Corners, essentially. And those are two major known Iroquois villages, and all of that stuff takes place right in French Creek. And yeah, and if anybody's seen that sign in the town, I can't pronounce it, but it says Fallen Fort, Place of the Fallen Fort. It's one of those historical signs. It's right in front of Ben D's place. And it's some Indian name, but it stands for Fallen Fort, and this is an old sign, so it has old thinking from the 1930s, I think. But it says basically, this is the place where the Oneida Indians defeated the Algonquins, and they call it the Place of the Fallen Fort. Well, I know they may have called it the Place of the Fallen Fort, but there was no battle there for the fall. I mean, actually, what I think it was referring to is French Creek as a whole. When you would, in other words, you're going to name it something at that point in time, so you would have thrown a label at the whole region, and I think it probably most likely referred actually to the site of Mutton Lane, which was a village site that was heavily palisaded. It had what we call a labyrinth entrance. In other words, to get through the palisade walls, you had to do this, right? It was really neat because it mapped it all out. But that showed evidence of being burnt down in my mind. I don't know if there's any conclusion you can make about it, but to me, the most likely thing that particular, the Fallen Fort was referring to was that. So, but there is a site at the mouth of French Creek, somewhere where the French Creek Bridge comes over. Denny's Cottage used to be, and there's a site there. I believe, from what I've determined from Carter's stuff that he had in the museum, his notes, is that was actually a pre-Iroquois site. That's why they called it an Algonquin site. because in the 1920s, anything that didn't look Iroquoian, they said, oh, you can sell that one. Now, of course, we know that it's actually a continuum, and it's just probably these people.
You speak of these as sites, but the average person seeing it wouldn't have a clue.
No, not necessarily, no. But there is stuff laying around, but you do need to know what you're looking for. And searching down and hunting down a lot of these sites, I had clues, collected clues, knew that there were sites in a general area, and a lot of the sites, like I say, around here, the first clue that you get, if it's a major site, is you can find signs of somebody digging around, popping them. Ooh, look what I found, which is neat, but it's destroying evidence, and it's not that you don't want to actually excavate, but it needs to be done in a way that where you're mapping what's going on, and you're trying to get all the information, squeeze every bit of information you can out of it, because actually archaeology in and itself is a destructive science. When you go to a site and dig something, you're destroying it. So it's really crucial that you record all the details, anything, even if it sounds ridiculous, still record it, because once you've dug it up, it's gone. And so a lot of the times in a lot of these sites and verifying, what I've done is actually where I poke around in my shovel testing is where I've seen obvious signs of disturbance. So in other words, where I'm doing a shovel test and checking and verifying a site, I'm trying to do it in a place where somebody's already made a mess. So I'm not destroying archaeological context. I can recover things from it, but because somebody's already dug this hole up and thrown all the dirt back in there, you've lost the archaeological context. So I try to limit what I'm doing to those kinds of areas, just to try to preserve the site as much as possible. But you know, I've discovered that the Matson site has an earthquake, so it's pretty neat.
Up on top of the hill, I heard that there's been Indians buried up there or something, in a up position. Do you have any information on that?
Well, that's referring to, basically everybody lives around here for a long time knows that Depauville was a site. There was at the very least a Iroquoian village site that basically is mostly covered up with fill right now, which is good in one way. But essentially, over the years, a few people have done some work over there, and the last group of people, I won't mention the university they came from because I don't recall for sure, but they were kind of people that were on the fringes in the academia, and they came and went charging after the bodies. They went looking for, because in any of these, especially Iroquoian villages, because you'll be able to find, you look, you'll find somewhere they buried people. So,
Yeah, that's
what there's a lot of, there's human remains associated with essentially more towards the cliff right here and scattered along that. And essentially these folks, I think it was in the early 70s. They got in trouble. The Onondaga Nation came up and chased them out. And actually nobody in the academic world that I'm aware of has been able to recover the data that they got. It's all locked away in the closet, kind of thing. So it's unfortunate. But yeah, there was a big site here in Depauville. And I'm absolutely sure that it's like most any of the sites around here, it's been used by various people through time. It's not just, wasn't just an Iroquoian village here. There was probably people coming to the bottom of the falls and fishing for thousands of years. So, I mean, that's the neat thing about it is that even though it makes it difficult to kind of understand the archaeological record, is that you're liable to find things that it may be St. Lawrence Iroquoian, 500 years old, 600 years old maybe, but in this very same zone you'll find something that's 1,000 years old. Most of these sites were used multiple times, and it's just like anything. I mean, you go in any park, you look for a nice campsite, right? There's certain things that'll click in your head what you imagine a nice campsite's going to be. Well, these people are similar. I mean, these places that were good places to go, they were good places to go for thousands of years. So it's likely that a lot of these sites are multi-component is the proper name.
Cedar Point.
See your point, yeah. Yes, sir.
How do you recognize some of those tools up there as being tools and not just stone? I mean, some of them you can take and see as.
Right.
You know,
A lot of it is growing up with it. Like I say, my earliest memories in life are learning about some of this stuff, and so it's something I've been around all my life, so it's something you kind of pick up. It's something that people need to typically take years to study in order to make identification. I don't by any means claim to be an expert or be able to identify real specific stuff, but a lot of this will follow a chain of logic. You'll see items like, let me see if I can chase something here. This, if anybody, this is essentially a giant flint chisel, right? So, I mean, it's easy to see the relationship, but, you know, a lot of this stuff, you have to in a sense know maybe how it was used, but if you imagine all the scrapers and stuff that you would need to shape pieces of wood. So there's a lot of items in here that were used in a scraping manner, there's a lot of items that are used in a drilling manner, and a lot of items that were used to scoop, so to speak, or what have you, but even when they're in a broken state or whatever, you can usually determine wear patterns and see. And typically, any of this stuff could be a maybe until you've actually looked at it and said, okay, that's been done by a handyman. Now, there's various things that tell you that, so, but that's kind of the stuff you pick over years of being around it, you know? Yeah, sure.
How do you think they did make that chisel?
Well,
How do
you had chipping technology, right, which is flint knapping. Using, there's some examples of bone and horn tools that you were used to peck, or to pressure flake, which is actually putting pressure on and twisting and it'll pop a chip off. So you have that technology. And a lot of these things here were done by grinding. You simply found a harder rock than this, and you found a rock of the right material that maybe had a shape that you could work with, and then you just took it from there. You spent 100, 300, 1,000 hours, I don't know, taking a rock and grinding this dish out so that you had a tool. So, various ways they made them, but most of the lithic or stone stuff was done either by chipping or by grinding, essentially.
Didn't you just recently, in the last year, find that big spear point?
Yeah,
That was it, you might wanna
that
tell us
was,
a little bit.
that was, I'll hold it up here so you can see. Another thing, what happens when you have this kind of thing in your family. My son is actually, as soon as he was able to walk, going with me, we're going to the woods. And we were crawling around in the brush looking for sites and doing stuff ever since he was this little. So I think he's continually trying to one-up me, but I don't know. Anyway, on the land that we've owned for 35, 36 years or something like this, on a tractor trail that I've walked thousands of times, by a rock that I've seen thousands of times and said, what the hell is somebody leaving a piece of black plastic water line out here for? Walk by. So I'm sitting around, we got a little camp out in the woods that we, get away from the world. And we're sitting around there, having a little picnic going, and Nolan comes back and has a few berries, talking, well, what are you, he's a big tough guy. So he's gonna jog back out to the road, which is, half a mile away or whatever. So he disappeared, and a minute or two later, all of a sudden he comes blowing back down the trail. He can't even talk. He's like, just slow down. What? He holds out, he goes, what is this? And this is what he held out. Half of this, I immediately ran with him back up the trail like a lunatic and helped him find the other half, which is laying right in this tractor trail. So, and this is, basically it's from a point in time where you would call it metalwood era. A couple thousand years ago. But very large. Obviously a spear, not an arrow. But So we're just still trying to figure out what exactly was going on there, because I've also located a couple other items that tells me that this wasn't just a find. Somebody didn't throw it in a moose and it wandered off and died. They lost their point. We located basically it's a piece of red slate, which is not indigenous to the area, and red slate, I got a little bit of it here, is something that you find at all these sites of this particular age, because it's an item they used for decorative, they made points, they did, it's just like a weird thing. You'll find this little red slate in this particular area, but I found back right near this a big chunk of it, what you would call a source stone. It's not just this is a big half a cobble. It was not something you carried around with you. It was something you kept at camp, and it's obviously got obvious signs of where they were grinding one side and shearing off pieces to make points, ground things, stuff like that. So that's a big clue that actually this wasn't just stuck in a moose wandering out in the woods. And the odd thing again is it's on this Alvar terrain back there, which is, if you would have asked me and any other archaeologist years ago, well, what about this limestone? If I can find anything, all right, you're gonna find nothing. I actually have now come to realize it was probably a very critical piece of the habitat puzzle around here in terms of what was going on. So, but yeah, so it's, and, again, and that's on a chunk of ground.
Piece of black pipe, huh?
Yeah, it's shiny and black, and there's about this much showing out of the side of the tractor rock, right? And it looks just like a piece of black water line, because it was shiny and smooth. Of course, I thought it was my father throwing junk. I was like, what? And I never, of course, but, my son, he picked it up, so he won the prize. But it's really illustrative of how much stuff's going on here. I mean, there's that. Yeah.
So these boat people, would they have been very nomadic? Would they have had stationary villages and other people came through and traded with them?
Again, that's somewhat open to debate, and not really known. My feeling is that these people were a lot more stationary than was thought. I mean, previous thinking a lot of revolves around other work that's been done in other parts of the state, but most of that work's been done on people that I would call an interior type of people. They didn't live on a coastline. So it kind of doesn't necessarily fit what happened up here. And so
Yeah, I wondered about that too.
it's quite a puzzle, I guess, that just really hasn't been solved. And I mean, my feeling is if you simply look at the winters we have and how much food resources were so readily available, why would you go anywhere? I mean, in one salmon run right here at the bottom of the falls, you could catch and dry enough protein to last 200 people all winter. I mean, the food resourcing was phenomenal here. So my question to the question is why would you leave? I mean, I understand the thinking is, okay, we came up here in the summer and then we go to the Tug Hill or someplace where there's 12 feet of snow for the winter.
Yeah, right.
That never made sense to me.
Wouldn't that be the other way around? Maybe summer in Tug Hill and climate
Again,
along near the river?
why would you leave here though? I mean, no, you may be right, but essentially, again, the question is, I don't like going to I love it here.
So maybe you're different animals in that.
It could be a sense of following your prey, so to speak. But again, if you start thinking about it, all of the prey animals, so to speak, were edge animals. They're not interior animals. They're not running around the Tug Hill. They would have been in these edge zones around water, bodies of water, which is everywhere. And also these Alvar terrain areas. We got thousands of acres of flat pavement limestone. And those areas, I would contend, large sections of them stayed open throughout the timeline. Grassy, open areas. I've seen it in my lifetime. I mean, you get a few trees that grow up in this stuff, and then we have a dry year and they'll die. It turns into burnt limestone ground again. There's no soil. there's no evidence of soil ever really being on there, really thinly. And so, I think, I have new thinking on it, the Alvar areas. I actually think that they were a food factory rather than a non-usable, non-wantable land, you know, just junk,
Kenny, isn't it like a sort of an anomaly, the amount of Alvar? I mean, it's not a common thing, it's a.
It only occurs in a couple places in the world. One's like somewhere, I think it's Norway or something, over that way, but the other's in the Great Lakes region, and then, there's other areas of Great Lakes that have this terrain, but we've got like one of the largest contiguous sections of all of our terrain in the world, essentially. So it's actually one of these things that people really haven't thought about, I guess. But I'm starting to think about it because, you know, every time my kid goes out wandering around and finds something.
There's like a confluence of conditions here that are unlike.
Right. Well, I mean, that's what keeps throwing me back to my thinking about why would you ever leave such a place? We got the best real estate for hundreds of miles. And it's probably been that way for thousands of years. Yeah.
I was just, it was really bothering me because Clayton has gone through recently digging up a whole area to build, what will resemble an old-fashioned train station.
Mhm.
So there was tons of soil that they put out by Frank Park.
Mhm.
Now, I wanted to go through that soil,
Yeah,
and what kept me from doing it was getting in trouble,
right.
you know,
You would need permission of the landowner, which is.
so I'd have to go to the town, and then I'd have to ask, may I sieve or go through that? Because, I mean, that to me looked like a
Most of
gangbusters.
that have been dug up, replaced.
I was just gonna say, most of that is fill material that's been
But you
brought in. I
You
mean,
could bring boats right up where
Yeah.
the town
It's,
office
it's
is. was-
probably not,
Anything that, we
No,
didn't miss the great
you,
find.
no, you may find some prehistoric stuff tucked in there somewhere. I mean, like I say, I mean, it's hard, but most of the material that was all fill material brought in when they built the coal docks and everything.
Mhm.
I mean, most of Clayton originally was like a bald chunk of rock that was almost cut off from the rest of the mainland.
Yeah.
And so, and Clayton's had a huge amount of fill since historical times, so
But
actually.
it seems like most of this
Yeah.
would be private land, which we don't really belong on, right?
No, I mean, private land is private land.
Right, now if you walk along the shoreline of a river, is
That's-
that public domain?
Not really, no. No, you don't really have permission to walk across my shoreline unless I give it to you in a sense. Now, off-season, most people around here, they're not real particular, and they don't really mind if you're wandering along the shore, you know? I mean, I've had several people really get interested in why I was wandering around the shore, you know, thought it was neat.
Yeah,
But again, anytime you're doing anything like that, it really is always best to have the permission of the landowner, or at least have them aware. Just simply because it is up to them. And, you know, anytime you go on private land, the private owner is liable for you, and your presence there, so that kind of adds in.
Sure.
Yeah.
What about Chimel Barrens? Is there anything up around that area?
I have never personally examined that, but I would assume that it's probably similar to what we got here, but yeah.
That's kind of a unique area.
Right, that's, Chimel Barrens is all of our terrain, that's exactly the same type of terrain. That's
Where those
right.
grows there.
Spell all about them. Spell.
ALVAR?
That's it?
Yeah. Yeah, but it's very interesting piece of terrain, and
Very rare.
it's rare in the world, and surprisingly, a lot of activity, I think, took place there, far more than anybody ever realized. But I don't think anybody ever thought about it. I mean, a lot of the stuff around here is known because at some point in time, somebody plowed the field up, somebody did something, they found something. So a huge amount of the sites originally were found when they were clearing the land, they were plowing. I mean, it was when stuff turned up. But
So really, nobody really knows where the bodies have been buried.
no, there's no list of bodies, no.
It's kind of weird, you know?
Well, no, it's not, because this is all prehistory, they didn't keep track
track, man.
Yeah, whatever.
They didn't keep records. If they had, I'd love to get my hands on it. But no, there's no record. I mean, no, you can basically assume that any village site probably has burials associated with it, whether they're immediately in the village site or nearby anyone's house. Basically, we had a lot of people live here over thousands of years, and so every one of them died, and they're buried somewhere. I don't know exactly where, and they're, it's different throughout time, but up here, we do not, well, we don't have the right kind of conditions like they would in Arizona, someplace to preserve bones and other things. It all disappeared. We probably had cave art here. It's all weathered away. I know there is one piece of cave art left, I think, on the way to Black Lake. It's under an overhang, protected from the weather, and it's petroglyphs. It's the only one that I know of in the entire region, simply because it was protected from the weather. It's more likely we had stuff like that all over the place.
Yeah, Mountain West.
Black River.
It's on the, on the canoe route into Black Lake. I'll put it that way.
And we have so many different types of land masses within this region simply
Yeah.
because of the glaciers that came through. I
Yeah.
mean, you have things that might have come from the other end of Lake Ontario that have been deposited in, like Tim's backyard.
Yeah.
You talked about sand dunes before, and you know his property pretty well back in
That's
everything.
general area where
There's-
it was referred to as the sand dunes at the head of French
Right,
Creek.
and he has that, on the front of that property, there's also water that just comes out continually, and you can't find the bottom in that
Yeah.
one.
Yeah. Well,
It's a
so
very
and
different-
it's- and that's the other thing too, is, I mean, you go in most regions, you get away from the coastal areas, good water is not everywhere. I mean, obviously there's water you could drink out of people, but Indians, I say Indians, really the Native Americans, all their sites, most of them, especially the later sites, were associated with a spring or some type of good cold water. Because, in the summer, you had cold water too. But out in the river, I think that I've actually thought that there's been occasionally they've found some full-size container ceramic vessels. There's been a few of them found around, and I've often thought about the fact that, in the middle of summer when it's hotter than heck, you know how cold that water is down the bottom of that river? I mean, what a great way to store stuff that you want to keep cool, or just to get a really nice cold drink of water. You could sink your vessel way down in there and try to get some of that nice cold water. So that may have been some of the reasons why some of these intact vessels are found, I think, like mostly in 20, 30 feet of water, something like that. Of course, water levels went up and down over time, but I mean, over the years, there's been anecdotal, so mostly evidence of out in Eel Bay where you gotta remember sturgeon were a big fish around here. Wow. Supposedly the story goes they used to stake them, which is basically take this stick, stick it through their gills, shove it in the bottom, and these things are such an ancient species that you could literally carve a 3-pound hump of meat off their side and it would still just sit there swimming on the bottom for weeks. And you could literally, I mean, it's kind of cruel, but I mean, fresh food. I mean, you didn't have refrigerators. But really, I mean, and there, a guy that used to, Bender, Bob, Charlie, told me about actually seeing some of the spots where they had staking and what appeared to be fish weirs, which basically would be like just a triangular fish trap that funneled everything. So I mean, like I say, underwater, on top, everywhere you go, there's probably traces of them someplace. I mean, it's really a pretty amazing place. And I think, I don't know, I've come to the conclusion the best way to look at it is both people. It kind of starts, everything starts making sense to me then.
Do you have any idea when agriculture started with the natives?
Best guess is around 1000 AD in this area. But that, again, is kind of a guess based on other regions when corn, Three Sisters or whatever, because there's debate whether squash was domesticated, came in for, I mean, so there's a little bit of debate ranging. But generally, by that period of time, it's thought that the people around here were actually growing corn and delving into more and more agricultural practices. But again, that's only a guess, and the only way you could tell is actually by essentially doing carbon dating of materials.
But that would pretty much solidify villages.
Absolutely.
Keeping the hunter-gatherer from
It takes,
being
right,
nomadic,
it makes the final transition from being a hunter-gatherer, and even if you're a semi-stationary hunter-gatherer, into an agriculturalist.
Yeah.
So there was, yeah, it was a big change along those lines. But again, because we're such a hub with all this activity going on, I wouldn't be surprised that agricultural items made their way here before they made their way to areas to our south. That's just a total speculation on my part, but it kind of makes sense to me. I mean, if the technologies and everything were flowing along the travel pathways, we've been right at the hub at it, so it may not have done as basically the consensus is that, corn bed and these things kind of gradually move northward at a steady rate of progression, but it could have moved in leaps. I mean, people up here could have been practicing agriculture a couple hundred years before people to our south. I mean, it's really, yeah, I mean, but again, I'm basing that kind of on the idea that we're in the hub of a major traffic intersection, so, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if, the guy carrying around the corn crop showed up here first and said, hey, check this out, I mean,
What about the islands? Did they move out in the summer? Did they?
I'm sure on the smaller islands, you wouldn't have necessarily wintered there. But Grindstone Island's probably big enough to winter, huh? I mean, again, if you think of the resources that you could put away in a good time of year, then it could certainly sustain you through. I mean, there's enough room on the island of Grindstone to gather enough fish resources, whatever, mammal resources, and if you're practicing agriculture, I mean, sure.
Have sites been identified out there?
That's kind of a real unknown on Grindstone. I actually believe that there's been a few, but not, I mean, you got Canoe Point down at the foot, things like that, but not really nailed down. And I have seen rim shirts, the tops of pots from Grindstone in the last 20 years that, to me, said there's a village site there. You would not get that type and size, and that kind of evidence would not just show up at a campsite. So of course, people could be reluctant to, to kind of tell you, oh yeah, hey, this is where I found that. But, that's something I'm trying to track down, because I'm pretty reasonably sure that there probably was a village site, an Iroquois village site, probably someplace on the Grindstone. It's big enough to sustain it.
Well, on your travel corridor that you've spent a lot of time investigating, I mean, that continues right across, this is the access to Canada.
Right, exactly.
And all of those peoples
Exactly.
and resources and.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, you're not gonna cross out Lake Ontario.
No, exactly. You're gonna follow the shoreline, so
Yeah,
I mean,
and
that's
through the islands, and
through
protected
the islands
waters.
and protected waters,
Yeah.
and that's what just makes us maybe a little bit unique in the northwest corner of Jefferson County, is because it kind of all confluences right in this area. And I don't have the name at the tip of my tongue, but actually one name that shows up in the historical record is for, Native American name is for the Chemung Bay. It's actually a neat name, I can't pronounce it, but it stands for the place where they smoke pipes. Well, if you know, in the Native American culture, of course, the women owned the village. It was their village. They ran it. The men dealt with inter-tribal political and going on the warpath and all that kind of stuff, so it was a matrimonial system, basically, but the men actually are the ones that made the pipes and smoked the pipes. So there's actually some evidence and some papers been written that allude to pipe styles actually being representative of political thought, so to speak. But generally, men came together to smoke pipes, to do their working out of whatever's going on, you know, I mean, that's part of their rituals, that's part of their routine. So I think it's significant that out of all the things that kind of survived, somebody from the past is pointing to this area and say, hey, everybody came there to smoke their pipes. So to me, that's another clue that says, you know, this is some kind of hub. If
Yeah.
a little clue like that would survive that long, you know, through history, because there really isn't a lot of historical stuff associated. So I just, you know, I mean, there's some stuff going on here for sure.
Well, isn't Jefferson County like a location for an abnormally significant number of those kinds of effigy pipes?
Yeah, the effigy pipes, I got a few examples here, is actually, Jefferson County is the place where they originated. This is the thinking anyway. There's more of them here than anywhere. There's a couple of sites that they're just effigy pipes all over the place. Of course, they're associated with some possibly being linked to political thought processes. The strange thing is that these effigy pipes show up in small numbers on the Five Nations sites, the rest of the state, at a certain period of time when they were first beginning to form the ideals behind the Confederacy. Around the time, you know, traditionally we've heard of Hiawatha came and brought them, you know. Yeah, all that stuff. Well, that all kind of happened in a certain time portion of the timeline. And at that same point in time, these effigy pipes showed up on these Five Nations sites. So a friend of mine, Dr. Tony Wonderly, wrote a paper that basically laid out somewhat of a case that, and this actually has some basis in Native American oral tradition, that the ideals for the Confederacy arose from here. And the political thought could be followed in the archaeological record by these effigy pipes. And there's actually a good basis for it, because if you think about it, in our region with all these resources, we had a bunch of these small groups already interacting and getting along, I think, with each other in a way that kind of basically evolved into the ideals of together we're strong, you know. So maybe these 25 groups of people that lived in our St. Lawrence River Valley actually, yeah, they could have very well been the origins for the Five Nations Confederacy, in the sense that these people had already worked out that, you know, hey, if a bunch of us work together, nobody can, you know, whoop us. So it's funny because, yeah, I mean, there has been a paper that's actually written to that, and which is really strange, because the other thing my grandfather was laughed about was claiming that Hiawatha came from Jefferson County. And he was kind of, you know, but strangely enough, you know, 40 or 50 years later, there's people writing papers that are basically alluding to something very much like that. But,
Okay, thank you. Gary?
yeah, I could go on and on. Excellent. People can always feel free to look me up.